I'm Keith Ferrazzi, and this is Win the Day with James Whittaker.
You're listening to Win the Day with James Whittaker.
What we do in life echoes in eternity.
Broadcasting from Los Angeles, California. Here's your host, James Whittaker.
Let's go!
Hey winners, welcome back to Win the Day. If this is your first time here, we sit down with some of the world's true change makers to give you all the tips, tools, and strategies to win the day every day. The quote for this episode, it comes from Dale Carnegie and says, "If you want to conquer fear, don't sit home and think about it. Go out and get busy." Today's guest has had a huge influence on my life, first through the written word, then through his friendship. Keith Ferrazzi, the renowned executive team coach, keynote speaker, and leadership expert, joins us today. As founder of Ferrazzi Greenlight, Keith has spent more than 20 years coaching Fortune 500 companies and unicorn startups. He is a regular contributor to the Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and the Wall Street Journal. His books include Who's Got Your Back, Leading Without Authority, and the #1 New York Times bestseller, Never Read Alone. Keith's new book, Never Lead Alone, has just been released. In this episode, we're going to talk about how to boldly be of service, why relationships are the greatest amplifier in everything you do, how to build a high-performing team that can 10x your success, and what you can do to manage the most important relationships in your life. Before we begin, the right bit of inspiration can completely change the trajectory of someone's life. So there's a friend or loved one out there who needs to hear this episode or could use some help to win the day. Share it with them right now. All right, let's win the day with Keith Ferrazzi. Keith, great to see you, my friend. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
And we're going to do all of that in 50 minutes.
We will do our best.
Beautiful. Nice to be here, buddy.
I know you're up for the challenge. Very first question. Who was the first person to believe in you?
Oh my gosh, definitely my father and my mother, but because she's still alive and she'll be listening to this. So definitely Mom, you too. But definitely my father. My father was a part of a first generation immigrant Italian family, and came to the United States, their family, to make sure that they had amazing opportunity, which didn't happen because they landed in Pittsburgh during the 70s steel crash. And all my dad wanted was to make sure his son was successful. I was my father's only son. My mom had been married once before with 2 children. And my dad just poured everything into me. His sweat, his blood, his chutzpah, his willingness to go out there and absolutely audaciously and dare to ask for things. Like, he got me into a small private elementary school that was the homeschooling for the Mellon children. Crazy. And that, of course, was a really tipping point trajectory of my life, just in terms of understanding how important education was. And he just believed in me like you can't imagine. He and I had designs for my future, which included President of the United States and amazing things. So sorry it took so long to answer, but my father, God bless his soul.
Yeah, knowing the heights that you went to, do you ever, how often do you transport yourself back to that time when you grew up for a little bit of perspective on how far you've come?
Well, it's so interesting. I mean, like a lot of other high achievers and driven people, I'm usually looking at what I haven't achieved yet or what I'm still hoping to achieve. And you're right. It's every once in a while I'll stop and I'll pause and I'll ask myself, okay, when you were a kid, if you had been able to draw on a map, this is what your life would be. Would you be satisfied? And I think I would. Yeah, I think I would. Although the falling short of the President of the United States thing, that might have been, as a kid, being like, well, wait a second, why'd you miss that one?
There's still time. Yeah. There's still time. And after your corporate career, you went and launched your own business. How did you go about securing the most successful clients and just securing corporate clients to begin with?
Well, what's most important is that no matter what I wanted to do in my life, I developed real authentic relationships at every stage. And those authentic relationships became critical to what I was achieving next. I talked about politics. I literally was on a path to get into politics very seriously. The people that I met at Yale University, where I was as an undergraduate, who were ready to fund my political career, alumni, etc., were the same people when I decided to leave politics and go into business. They were the same people that gave me loans to go to Harvard Business School when I couldn't afford it. So, and I find that the people that I got to know along the trajectory of my life were waiting for me to open the shingle for my own firm, Ferrazzi Greenlight. And, I continue to find that the curation of authentic, generous, intimate, connected relationships, that's why we're here today, I'm sure there's a very long list of folks who would love to be on your podcast. But, I knew I could count on a friend when something was coming up that I was really excited about to give it some volume and velocity. So the key is that we always have to recognize that the relationships of today are going to bear fruit for decades to come as long as they're authentic.
Did you find that the belief that other people had in you enabled you to have a little bit of confidence in the short term that you needed when you maybe didn't necessarily believe in yourself as much?
So after I wrote the book, Never Eat Alone, I wrote a book called Who's Got Your Back? And in that book, I started understanding how important it is for us to have a tight, intimate group of folks that won't let you fail. Now, what you'll notice about my relationships is even individuals that are more on the acquaintance side tend to be deeper connected to me than most, because when I am together with somebody, I tend to go more deeply, and I tend to be, as much as I can, be more generous. And therefore, I fill those relationships up to the brim, even though I may, in other people's world, they may be a sparse acquaintance because they didn't have enough time to really invest. I use that time preciously. That said, I have also recognized that the 3 people around you who are the closest relationships, 3, 5, whatever it is, those individuals truly define the trajectory of your success. They're the individuals that always tell you the truth. They're the individuals that hold you accountable. There's the individuals that lift you up. They're the ones when, you think things are falling apart. You can call on the weekend with tears in your eyes, trying to figure shit out. And that, what we called, at the time when I wrote the book, I called lifeline relationships, which I really have now redefined in this new book. I call them co-elevating relationships that are deeply committed to elevating each other. That's so important. So for me, have that, they're frankly family, and I'm blessed with having a very tight group like that around me.
Is it important for people to solicit feedback from those people, or are the people so close to you that they know they can sense a bit of intuition when something might be off?
I think it's both. I think it's both. But the one thing that I teach teams to do is, even if you've got a solid team, it's very easy for teams to slip back into the most pressing work situations, etc. But you have to open up regular practices. So when, my family and I get together for dinner, and I call, my family, they're not biological, but a very tight group of individuals. It includes people like Peter Diamandis, who might have been on your show in the past, just really dear friends. We have rituals, and those rituals, like I suggest to teams, they do check-ins. So what are you struggling with personally or professionally? And those conversations are immediately followed by what we call a 5-5-5 exercise. And it's not quite as formulaic as this, but somebody talks about what they're struggling with, then the table peppers them with questions for a while, and then the table gives them very directive advice, but you don't have to take it. So it's not a defensive kind of thing. It's just amazing data from a rich group of individuals. So, you have to turn these things into rituals and practices, just like teams. You can't just expect a team to always be on. So what I love about the new book, which is called Never Lead Alone, is that we really focus on what are the principles and practices that the principles that turn into practices of high performing teams. And, whether that's a tight group of people in your life or whether that's a business team, there's simple practices that assure it's high performing.
Never Lead Alone is a fantastic read. So congratulations on another amazing book in your portfolio.
Thank you.
Who do you want someone to be once they've finished reading it?
A better teammate. A better teammate. Thanks for asking that question. I've never answered it. I think it's time having the world is indexed on leadership for quite a long time. No question how important it is. But we've wrung the juice out of the sponge on this one. And I think it's time for us to start looking at a very under-indexed conversation, which is, what does it mean to be a great teammate? What do you expect from a team? If you are a leader, is there a roadmap for what a team should be doing that qualifies as high performing? So, a great leader gives feedback. but I also think that a great leader makes sure that the team gives each other feedback. A great leader holds the team accountable, but a great leader makes sure that the team holds each other accountable. A team needs to keep up each other's energy and is committed to the resilience of the team and lifting each other up. A great team proactively builds the relationships and keeps the empathy strong and forgiving among a group of people that are just human, right? So what we do in the book, Never Lead Alone, is we believe that there are 10 critical shifts from moving from a mediocre team, which most are, to a high-performing team, which few are. Only 15% of our research shows that teams are really high-performing. And it's interesting, and teams would say that. There's one question in our diagnostic, which is, are you achieving your full potential of a team? And almost no executive team answers yes to that question. So we know that there's a lot of work, but now I've got a formula and a set of practices to get there.
Very interesting. In the book as well, you so bravely talk about the paradox between your sexual orientation, like your presidential aspirations that you mentioned as well.
Yeah.
Like it's such a interesting time for you, wanting to be president, but coming to terms with a lot of stuff personally as well. Can you take us a bit more into that time in your life and how difficult that was?
So, I mentioned my father and I had this contract that I would grow up and be governor of Pennsylvania, probably get into Congress early on the way to the gubernatorial seat, and ultimately become president. Now, the reason for it wasn't just some whimsical desire to have a position of power. We grew up in really abject poverty in the crash of the steel industry. If it wasn't for friends and family, we would be, eating welfare cheese at different times of of my young life. And the desire was to make sure that we fixed American manufacturing. That was my commitment. I wanted to fix American manufacturing. Little did I know in retrospect that the most useless place to try to fix American manufacturing would have been politics. It's just that I was as a kid, you revered these people. This is back in a day, frankly, when I think we did revere some of our politicians. This was the Reagan era, and some amazing humans in the positions. And I struggle sometimes today. But taking myself back to then, I went to Yale. I crushed it in politics at Yale. I ran for city council of New Haven, et cetera. I get out of Yale and I go to a region of the world in southwestern Pennsylvania, actually near Philadelphia, where I thought I could win a congressional seat. But correlation to that is I realized I was gay. And the commitment for me was to figure out, do I decide to live a life in secrecy and continue to pursue a political career? Or am I authentic to myself and find another way to be of service? And I chose the latter path. Back then people forget, that there was no Will and Grace. There was no Barney Frank. I joked that Liberace was straight at the time. How in the hell did anybody think that was possible? But and so I chose a different path, and I'm glad I did, because to be honest, I look at, this isn't a political show, but I look at what's going on right now with U.S. Steel and in Japan Steel and the potential acquisition there in Pittsburgh. And it was the Japanese that crushed the American steel industry because of back then you would have opened the Pittsburgh newspapers and it would have said cheap foreign imports. It would have looked like it was an issue of, needing protectionism. The reality is it was a lack of curiosity among the industrialists of America that didn't pursue constantly iterating and bettering the work processes. The Japanese took a playbook out of American academics where they decided that it was total quality management, Six Sigma, Kaizen, iteration of better ways of working down at the front where a team of workers could self-define their future. And it's interesting because that principle is very much what I'm advocating for among executive teams today and among any teams today. The team has to step up and take part in the leadership. So anyway, this is a very long, contorted story as to why I didn't get into politics, but I'm glad I'm where I am because I see among business leaders today a similar lack of curiosity, and it worries me. If you look at the book, is 10 different chapters. Each one has a hero story of somebody who did a shift that is critical to their team in their organizations. I found after I looked at it, most of them were engineers. And most of them were engineers who along the way decided to turn their attention on engineering their company's ways of working, just like the Japanese did. And, just like we did with TQM, just like we did with Agile software development as a major shift in ways of working, we need it today. We need new ways of working. And there's not enough curiosity and not enough minds focused on re-engineering the white-collar ways of working. So that's what's been my tilting at windmills for the last decade. And I thought we were going to have a great opportunity during the pandemic to shift. But what I'm seeing is so many folks just drifting back into the old malaise of the same way of collaborating and working together, which is sad to me.
It's so interesting seeing that the work you do is helping companies embrace who they are in their most difficult moments so they can get closer to their potential.
Yeah.
Exactly what you needed at that sort of crossroads time in your life.
Yeah, in my life. Thank you.
Yeah. How do you feel about Elon Musk and the companies that he has, Tesla, SpaceX, an undeniably intimidating environment for people to work at, high turnover, but of course changing the world perhaps more than any other companies ever have?
I've actually done some studying recently. A friend of mine, Dennis Neal, has a book coming out soon on Elon Musk's leadership principles. I was actually starting to research and write one myself until Dennis came out with one himself. But I've done a lot of work on it. And first of all, undeniably, Elon gets more out of the average person than most leaders do. Now, what you could look at his tactics and challenge those tactics as not being appropriate for today's work world. But what's interesting is I think if anybody is going to go to work at a Musk company, they're going to work with an open understanding of what that social contract is. Not at all to conflate the Musk leadership philosophy and what I'm about to introduce to you, but there's a company called Elf Beauty. And Elf Beauty, when they're recruiting people, they say to folks, when you come to work here, you are going to be stretched and grown like no other place. If you want to work here, you will be a better professional and a better person in 3 years than you are when you start. But in exchange, you've got to adopt our social contract. We give peer-to-peer feedback all the time, but we do it out of love, and we do it out of care. And we are committed to the mission, but we're committed to each other. My point is that most organizations that I work with, when I start working with them, most teams, they don't have that social contract. They have a social contract that is more on the defensiveness side. They get their feedback from authority figures who are allowed to, not from peers who are sitting around them. Mm-hmm. And so if you go back to the Musk question, he's got a clear social contract. Would I coach him if he were interested in adapting and adopting some of his practices? 100%. Can we all admire what the man has created? 100%. So, I believe that if people's eyes are wide open to what they're stepping into, there's an entire algorithm of reasons why you might want to work at a company that is committed to getting people off the planet and onto Mars. And
a big mission to believe in. Yeah.
And you might choose to accept or adopt or adapt to certain eccentricities of that system. But I do believe that expecting more of somebody than they expect of themselves is a very powerful leadership trait. I do believe that holding a team's feet to the fire to be clever and not be victims to circumstances is a very powerful leadership characteristic. And I'm looking forward, I haven't finished reading it yet, but I'm looking forward to Dennis's book coming out. I'm looking forward to having more dialogue around this. And, who knows, maybe someday I might be invited in to have that conversation with with Elon.
Yeah, I hope so. He does something interesting where he often manufactures a crisis to get a result. And I know you work a lot with companies who have been in a crisis before, but it seems that they're more reactionary, where sometimes Elon can manufacture a crisis to be able to hit a deadline.
Yeah, and that may be true. I'm not sure. I haven't read much or had the conversation about what does that mean to manufacture a crisis. I think Elon just presses people to have such audacious visions that they're always at crisis in crisis of being able to meet their mission, right? But, people have said this to me. I was working with an organization coming out of bankruptcy and they were going into the pandemic and they said, "Oh, we are at our best in crisis." Well, and that's true. When I wrote a book during the pandemic with Harvard Business School Press, and we studied organizations that were in crisis, as we all were. And what if you were to take a methodology about how we dealt with the pandemic, and I called that methodology, we became radically adaptable. And radical adaptability is an amazing characteristic if you can sustain it. Now, we did it by gritting our teeth and hanging on by our fingertips during the pandemic, and it wasn't sustainable. We had one of the greatest mental health crises that, I think business has ever seen. But the underlying principles of foresight, always constantly taking in inclusive and more information and being able to look around corners, absolutely powerful to be radically adaptable. And it's all of that research from the pandemic period that I put in that book is also in this new book, but it's much more practically laid out as to what a team needs to do to adopt that kind of agility, that kind of foresight, that kind of inclusion of ideas and resilience. How do you keep the energy strong as opposed to just trying to grit your teeth and work your way through it?
So much of your work revolves around high-performing teams. Are there any teams outside of the corporate world that you're just naturally interested in and that you drew inspiration from?
Well, certainly sports teams. I mean, I think that it's so funny. I feel that there's a big loss. So many business executives are sports fans. I don't happen to be. I love playing sports. I'm not a big watcher, but I've a good friend of mine, Peter Guber, who is one of the owners of the Warriors, of the Dodgers, one of the largest owners of baseball teams in the country. I helped work with him on a book that he wrote years ago. Absolutely love the man. And he's such a great leader. And he's taught me a lot about leadership of sports teams. But I think the leadership of sports teams can teach us a lot. The work of a sports team in terms of leadership, so much of it actually can happen in the locker room or in the huddle. And that's when the team itself is coaching each other, right? And that's something that we miss in business teams. Imagine as a leader, if you're listening to this, imagine as a leader if your team was as committed as you were to the mission, but equally committed to helping each other get there, where you as a leader didn't have to run around like playing whack-a-mole, trying to hold people accountable, give people feedback, keep people's direction. What if the team did that for each other? Imagine what that would do. And in one of the early chapters, there's a gentleman named Sergey Young, who is a wonderful investor in the longevity space and a thought leader in the longevity space, who had a very significant investment team that I coached, and he applied all of these principles to. And for him, it allowed him to free himself up 30% of his time when the team finally stepped up, and then allowed him to go over and start an entirely new business in the longevity space and start an award with his and my mutual friend, Peter Diamandis, an X Prize for, generating longevity in the world for the masses, for millions and billions of people. But he wouldn't have been able to do it if he kept running around with his old leadership style, playing whack-a-mole on a specific individual. So we've got to start realizing that the team, we need to expect more from the team. We need to expect the team to step up and perform, not as individuals, but as a team. And what we do in the books, we give that roadmap. And you mentioned about being a good teammate, how important that is. A big theme of people who come on the show who run big businesses talk about the number one attribute that they want in someone they're hiring is the will to win.
And of course, will to win doesn't necessarily make you an extrovert or an introvert. You can be an introvert and still have the will to win, but you need the will to win as an individual, but also the will to win as a team. So has that will to win come across as a core theme in the research that you've done?
Interesting. The individuals, they give each other that will to win. What I see in high-performing teams is that they're constantly gauging each other's energy. And when somebody is sloping off, they're either understanding at the core why and giving that person a lift or giving that person the kind of support that they need, or they're giving them the boost that they need. And, we all get, disheartened, sometimes even disenfranchised. So how does the team keep you on a trajectory of bringing you back, right? And it's those micro corrections. It's not just this macro movement of a specific individual. It's what you do in short, weekly, agile sprints as you're checking in with each other. The book talks about an exercise called stress testing. Teams have to stress test each other on a weekly basis on critical projects. So, an individual leading a critical thread of work has to stand in front of the team and share what have they've achieved, where are they struggling. So important that people present where they're struggling. It's both an open invitation for the team to help, but it also helps the team more clearly diagnose where they can be helpful. And then, then where they're going next. And the team, instead of just an old-fashioned report out, instead of just listening passively, right, and chirping in a bit, the team gets assigned into groups of two where they write into a shared document, a Google Doc or something, Teams Doc. They write into a shared document, here's where I challenge what you've said. Here are risks that I see that you don't see. Here's ideas or innovations we might offer you. And here's some places where I think I can help. Now, that action was so simple because it was just turned into an assignment. We turn a weekly assignment of this stress testing. It actually creates the challenge culture you're looking for. So teams left to their own devices will fall back into the malaise of silo behavior. They'll focus on just getting stuff done. But teams who are given assignments to think of themselves as a team, elevating each other, that's what becomes game-changing.
We'll be back with the show shortly. I've got a quick question for you. Are you living up to your potential? It's a question that shapes your family, your business, and your overall happiness every single day. That's why I'm excited to introduce the Win the Day quiz. Head over to winthedayquiz.com right now, answer a few thought-provoking questions, and you'll instantly discover how well you're performing relative to your true potential. And here's the exciting part for our Win the Day family. As a fan of the show, you'll receive a personalized and absolutely free action plan to help you win the day every day. Now, just imagine how transformational the results will be when you consistently show up as the best version of yourself in every aspect of your life. Don't miss out. Take the Win the Day quiz now by visiting winthedayquiz.com or click the link in the show notes. All right, let's get back to the show. Dr. Michael Gervais on the show talks about the importance of taking it as information, not an attack when it comes to feedback. But it sounds like you're taking it one step further. It's knowing that if you're receiving feedback, it's almost certainly because the other person, the other stakeholder, has my best interest at mind with that feedback.
Yeah, well, that needs to be, as I say, I call it a social contract. Culture's a social contract. Some social contracts are, if I get feedback in front of the boss by a teammate, damn that person, they just threw me under the bus. That's one social contract. There's another social contract that says, of course I'm going to give you that feedback because I'm not going to let you fail. And that's how everybody feels about it. And everybody celebrates it that way. One of the things I've realized is that candor and feedback typically has always come to us from authority figures. Our parents gave us feedback. They were giving us a directive. Our bosses, our coaches, our teachers, they were giving us directives when they were giving us feedback. They were telling us what to do differently. Now, all of a sudden, Ferrazzi comes in and says, you all are peers giving each other feedback. It almost feels like I'm about to have 10 bosses and everybody has conflicting opinions. What the hell am I going to do with that? But you're not. When a peer gives you feedback, you've got to realize that they, when they're giving it to you and you, when you're receiving it, they're just giving you data. It's just data. And data needs to be corroborated by you, assessed by you, analyzed by you, and a decision needs to come out of the group of data you're getting. But if the team is giving you all the data, it's not isolated situations, and they're not allowed to think that it's a directive, but now you can have information to act on. And that's a shift that we have to really make sure that people understand, which is just because you're giving feedback doesn't mean it'll be executed. And just because you're receiving it doesn't mean you have an obligation to. You have an obligation to make sure you're analyzing it as a part of the rest of your data.
And
you understand how different that is?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And psychological safety is a big thing that you talk about in your new book as well. Do you feel like psychological safety is a line that needs to be crossed early on and then we sort of park it a little bit? Or is it the type of thing that through the weekly check-ins and all of the other stuff that you mentioned, we're continuing to sort of maintain it?
What my work as a behavioral scientist has done is realize that you don't think your way to a new way of acting. You act your way to a new way of behaving. Practices change everything. Practices change culture. You want to build psychological safety, then you adopt a set of practices that build psychological safety. Teaching people psychological safety, I think, is useless. There's a lot of thought leaders out there that make a lot of money about writing and teaching these big principles. I'm just humbly looking at 3,000 teams that we have in our data set. I look at the practices that high-performing teams use, and I take them out, scrub them off, apply them to other teams, and if it moves the needle, then it makes it into our what we call high-return practices. It makes it into the book. So psychological safety is made up of a few things. One of them is professional trust, meaning do we show up and do we get the job done? And do we repeatedly have the capability of giving feedback to each other? Well, stress testing on a regular basis will build that practice, right? So people will realize that their peers can take feedback on ideas, on performance, and handle it. And in fact, it actually elevates all of us. Now, psychological safety also has a personal component, a personal relationship component. So on a monthly basis among the team, we do something called an energy check, where a team literally goes around and says, my energy is on a scale of 0 to 5, here's what it is and why. What's draining it? And somebody would say, it's a 2. Mom's been having some health issues and we haven't been able to figure things out and it's really draining my energy. Or, this project is killing my team and I, and yada, yada. So by understanding that energy check, by being on the docket to share vulnerably with each other, it increases the relationship quality. The average relationship score of a team is about 2.8 if it's co-located, 2.3 if it's hybrid. But then when you do these regular energy checks, it goes up to 3.9, whether you're hybrid or co-located.
Huge difference.
Huge difference. And what's interesting is I understand why executives want people back in the office, because their model for how to build culture is by having people do what I call serendipity bonding, bumping around each other in the office, collaborating with each other in the office. But what we prove in the book is that if you can do the work differently, if you make relationship and bonding purposeful, the cultural elements of relationship go higher. If you use tactics, which we call 21st century collaboration tactics, this book is one of the big benefits of this book is it's anti-meeting. We focus a lot on how meetings are actually not the first form of collaboration, but the last, and really understanding how to use the tools of collaboration, which are much more inclusive, much more psychologically safe. The average meeting of 12 people, 4 people think they're heard. The average collaboration where you're using collaborative documents and you're using different software that are available today, 10 out of 12 people think that they're heard. So we can assure you that by changing the way you work, you can have a radically different performing team. And, the reality is it's easy to say, get everybody back to the office, but there are practices, simple practices that could make your entire team perform significantly better, whether you're in the office or whether you're remote or hybrid.
Sounds like that'll be a huge opportunity or a massive fail for companies, depending on how they approach it.
Yeah.
Bringing everyone back.
Yeah.
Relationships have been everything for me. You have been leading the way for relationships ever since, Never Eat Alone, ever since I first read that. That changed my life. You're about 20 years ahead of me in terms of impact and career and all of that stuff, which
and
is
age.
great. And age. I got you on the grey hair, though. So how does someone who wants to boldly be of service to other people, but they're not sure how to go about that, are there any specific things that they can look for to do that?
So let me make sure that folks know why you're asking that question. What I say to folks is that if you're going to deepen relationships to people, you need to lead with being of service, whether that's a client, whether that's a boss, or whether that's a teammate. How do you lead with being of service? And very few people think that they can, and very few people actively try to pursue how to. It depends on who you're talking about, right? I mean, somebody like yourself, you have a platform and you reach out to a thought leader and say, I really admire your writing. I'd love to give it voice through my platform. Okay, that's a generosity that you have to offer the world. And it's interesting because I imagine it's one of the reasons you do podcasting, because you want to develop relationships with interesting, compelling people. And the reality is that people don't think of developing their lives to develop currency. And, I literally got a text yesterday, and it was a photo of me in the New York Times from the early 2000s. And it was from a young man, probably not that young anymore, who is with a commercial real estate company. He said, when I first read your book, I guess it was Never Eat Alone, I started working my butt off to develop greater degrees of currency that I could make other people successful. Simple things like I'd rip out, this is him speaking, I'd rip out restaurant recommendations to be able to give to people. I would get to know doctors. If I bumped into somebody at a dinner party and they were a specialist, I'd get to know them better so that I could then refer people who might have had their specialty challenged to that kind of a doctor. And I would help, this person was saying, and I've always been looking for ways that I could help my clients and prospects, their kids get internships. So I'm always collecting people who do internships. So living your life realizing that for you to be successful, so much of it is helping other people be successful and just constantly be on the path to generate that kind of currency.
Yeah, it gives people agency to be able to do that rather than waiting in line for their opportunity that may never come.
Well, as a poor kid from Pittsburgh, I realized that doors don't open. I didn't have nepotism available to me. I had to create my own nepotism, which I did. I mean, great relationships with powerful people open doors. And, my opportunity is I now use those great relationships with powerful people to open doors for other powerful people, which gives me the currency. So my network actually is the currency that I have to give anybody of whatever power they may or may not have.
As a poor kid from Pittsburgh who's made it to the top of the charts, you've been working and consulting to some of the most successful companies on the planet, cameos on TV shows, you've done it all. Right. When did you realize the significance of the life you'd been able to create?
I don't know that I have. I remember going to a Tony Robbins event and developing a great friendship with Tony over the years, where he makes you identify what is important to you. Is it significance? Is it recognition? For me, it's always been impact. And I think, part of it was I never felt like I deserved to be in the room, either because I was poor or then because I was gay. And I said to myself, I guess consciously or unconsciously, if I can make an impact on people's lives, if I can make a difference in the world, maybe people will think I'm okay. And that's probably spurred a lot of my life. And it's just momentum at this stage. I recently got to know an incredible man who's the king of Bhutan. And if anybody follows my social media, I've been spending a lot of time over there recently. And I now have recruited 20 volunteer coaches, some of the best coaches in the world. And we're all working to double the GDP of Bhutan while still helping them preserve and develop the beautiful nature of their happiness index, their gross national happiness, and making it a really extraordinary place in this world that we can all go to. That's the kind of stuff that just makes me realize I've arrived, that I have the luxury of being able to do all of that out of my foundation, and, you know, not having to have that scarcity mindset of asking, where's the next buck coming from? Because I spent most of my life asking that, like, where's the next buck coming from?
I'm also an impact-driven person, and I think it can be hard for us to take feedback from someone who isn't an impact-driven person, talking about the importance of respecting your legacy and presence and all of those things. Of course, you don't want to be too impact-driven that keeps you too far in the future, but I think it is very nice to honor and say, cool, I am driven by impact. Yeah. And that's just who I am, and that's great.
Help me understand what you mean by that in terms of taking advice from somebody.
So if someone, it's a bit like that idea of never take advice from someone that you wouldn't trade places with. If someone doesn't really know who you are and they can't really give advice from that position. So to give you a bit of context on that, in probably the darkest moment, or one of the darkest moments of my entire life, was when I was in Boston. I had all of these different things going on in 2012. And I recognized I needed help, and I didn't have help near me. So I went and saw a psychologist. And this psychologist said, "You are such a perfectionist." And I said, being a perfectionist has driven every single good thing in my life. And she said, well, you need to start removing that. And I said, I can't. I just need to get back to feeling bulletproof again. And she was it was helpful at the time, but she was not the right fit. There wasn't a congruency there for who I was and who she was.
I see. You know, that's interesting. Yeah. I think about how I've always maximized, not for financial returns, but I've maximized for impact. And, you know, I've done very well for myself financially, but I think about friends who've lived their entire life maximizing for financial impact. And boy, their lives look very different than mine. You know, they've got their private jets, et cetera. That's sometimes where I feel a little like, wow, geez, did I make the right choices? But then I realized, I remember when I was just out of undergrad, and I had to figure out what to go do next. I remember I was saying I really wanted to go be a politician, knowing that was not going to be a place to make money. But I was also offered a job as a trader down in New York City, because one of my fraternity brothers' father was a trader and had gotten to know him. And I went down and I experienced that life for a few days. Clearly, the chauffeur-driven cars were attractive and all those kind of things. But I was like, God, I just didn't have any resonance in my gut, in my soul, right? Versus, you know, put me on a stage in front of a group of people talking about how their lives can be better. It just lifted me. So, you know, I don't think I had a choice. You know, I could bemoan whether or not I could have chosen certain paths that would have, you know, made me significantly richer. But in reality, I don't think I had a choice. I don't think I could have done it if I wanted to.
Everything comes at a cost and a sacrifice too. Someone who knows that better than anyone is our mutual friend and mentor, Dr. Mark Goulston, who sadly passed. An amazing guy. He's came on the show twice. Is there a particular lesson from Mark Goulston that really means a lot to you, or anything else over the years that he taught you?
Yeah, I guess I would say two things. First of all, he was such a good listener, and he wrote a book on it. It's a great book, and I may have even written the foreword. If I didn't write the foreword, I certainly had a jacket quote on it. But I'm not as good a listener as he is. I'm a reactive person. I jump into things. I'm very, very dominant in my conversational style. But no question, he taught me the value of listening. So that was one. But the other thing he taught me was humility. You know, he just constantly had the most beautiful personal humility that would draw me toward him. And to some extent, you know, he had such great success. He had successful books, etc. But he never thought of himself as successful, which I thought was a shame. And that was one of the things that I wanted to make sure that somehow I found for myself, which is to be able to relish the achievements and the success I have and enjoy them, not just always feel like I needed to add more or contribute more. So I'd say maybe three things there. that I learned from. I miss him so much. It was such a loss.
Yeah, one of the things he said to me was about him very much diluting his impact. Like you mentioned, he felt like he didn't have that impact that he wanted to have on the world and all the things that came from that.
So many of us have such weird, crazy monkey minds that that drive us to success. But then, as we're getting there, it doesn't make us as happy as we should be, and we'll often cap the success that we should have. That's one of the things that I feel I'm now moving into a different stage of my life. I've recently gotten engaged,
Congratulations.
which thank you.
Awesome.
Very happy. I couldn't be happier. I found an amazing partner. And by the way, I've had some amazing relationships in my life. And I look back on them and I feel badly because I wasn't the kind of person, I don't think, that was ready to meet in partnership. I happen to find one of the most extraordinary humans today, and we're meeting in partnership. We're true co-elevation partnership. And that changes the world. I think, if I've often asked myself, what are the 10 most important things I've done in my life that have changed my own life? And right now, love is doing that. Love is, not that Jack Nicholson quote, which is like, you make me want to be a better person, but it's true. Love is an amazing motivator, and it's an amazing giving yourself that psychological safety to take different risks and other things. It's really beautiful.
When you first came on the podcast, it was remotely, must have been 4 years ago, and I asked you about co-elevation in the home, and that was the response you gave. You said, that's the partner that I'm looking for. That's the partnership that I want.
Yeah,
How amazing to find out that you've got it now.
Thank you.
It's all come full circle.
So much of what opened it for me was plant medicine. I don't know if you've had anybody on your show that's talked about their experience with ayahuasca, but I had gone down to Costa Rica and experienced a psychedelic drink get delivered by indigenous Indians that opens the brain neural pathways that's used for PTSD of returning vets, etc. But unbundling some of that shame and fear that I had when I was growing up as a kid, and giving me a different way of approaching the world through literally rewiring my brain. It's been very powerful. You probably know guys like Joe Polish and others who have found that medicine as being very powerful.
Yeah, 100%. And I messaged you after I'd interviewed Dan Martell to let you know that we had a great clip coming out. How did you feel when, Dan Martell is someone now who's absolutely crushing it. He really is the epitome of Win the Day. And I said, what is the book that changed your life more than anything else? And he said, Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi, and then spoke about in great detail how that happened for him.
Keith Ferrazzi's book, you brought him up, Never Eat Alone. That book transformed everything. He wrote about in that book that I just thought, this guy is bananas. It was the idea of doing workouts with people that you work with. And the thought of inviting the CTO to a jazzercise class or like go for a run. I was like, that's so crazy. Like, these people are busy people. They have their own things. What kind of conversation could you have? It like legit blew my mind. I go, there's no way. And true to his word, the first time I ever got connected with Keith, he invited me to a class. I think it was a spin class in West Hollywood or something.
Barry's Boot Camp?
Yeah, it was a Barry's Boot Camp. It was a Barry's Boot Camp. That's it. And so it's funny, as you fast forward to today, I will meet with any person, anytime, no matter where you live in the world. You fly to Kelowna and we go for a hike. I work out. Pretty much every one of my workouts is with somebody I work with. It is so integrated into my life that it would be weird for me to not have done a workout with people I'm trying to build a deeper relationship with.
Well, it was funny because I think, I had invited him to a Barry's boot camp, which I'm still doing today. And I still invite friends all the time. Joey Gonzalez, who's the CEO there, used to be a trainer, and now he's the CEO at Barry's and is a good friend. The impact that I think just a few years ago, I had this awakening, which is, if I had done nothing after Never Eat Alone, I would have had an impactful life. That book changed millions of people's lives. I remember one time not long ago, I was in Vietnam and I was at some small gym. It was just a local gym to a friend that I was staying at. And the young girl comes up to me and she says, "Are you Keith Ferrazzi?" And I said, "Yeah." And she runs back and she comes back and she has a Vietnamese version of Never Eat Alone that's dog-eared. And she said, somebody gave this to me in my village, and it gave me the courage to get out of my village and to get to the big city. And if it wasn't for you, I'd still be the daughter of a farmer. And she's still the daughter of a farmer, but she's
Literal
climbing
chills.
up. Yeah.
From
It's
villages
beautiful.
to required reading in business school and corporations.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's to some extent, a difficult, it's a blessing to try to outlive the shadow of something as great as that, and, and I chose a different path. Many people who wrote their first big book stayed in the consumer world, like Tim Ferriss and others. I've always thought of myself as a business person first, not a thought leader first. And I really love helping to shift businesses. And I've had the blessing of being a part of major, major transformations of brands that we know, and now governments, and NGOs like the World Bank and others. I just feel such gratitude to have that work, but I never really went to the broad consumer world, right? You even look at this book, Never Lead Alone. It's definitely for leaders and organizations and, people who running companies, YPO, but it's also for teammates. I never stayed on the self-help, pure self-help side. I often wonder what life would have looked like, back then if I had done that. But I really love the impact that I'm making today, and blessed of what I was able to do with Never Eat Alone.
A question I'm starting to ask more people on the show is this: what do you love most about yourself?
Again, I still struggle with some of this stuff in terms of being too prideful, etc. Do I love about myself? What I appreciate about myself is my ability to connect with audiences, whether it's a team of people or a room of 1,000 people or whatever it is. I love the ability to connect with people. So that I love.
You do that so well too. You ignite that
you.
virtually, in person. I've seen both. Just
Yeah. It's I don't know. I feel empathetic to whoever I'm with and connected with, and I feel ability to do that. But putting that aside, a lot of people talk about the generosity, because I really do formulaically live my life saying, okay, how can I be helpful? And know that has a return on investment, not necessarily to the person. It's not like I give to get, but it's by putting it out there. So, I really appreciate people's resonance with having established a brand of being generous and offering to be of service. Being of service, I really like my impact side.
You do it so well.
Yeah, thank you. It's kind.
Last question before the rocket round. On your best day, what's an affirmation you would write on a flashcard that you could show yourself on your worst day?
I wear a word on my wrist, and it says breathe. And, that's something I always have to remind myself, just to pause for a moment and breathe. And I learned that when I was doing a 10-day Vipassana sit, which is a meditation retreat that if your audience doesn't know about it, it's powerful. It's free. Somebody has already paid for you to be there. And when you're done with it, you get to decide if you're paying for the next person. So it's free. It's 10 days. It's 10 days of silence. Day 7 is powerful. And on day 7, it really cracked me to make me realize no matter what shit might have hit the fan, there's always a place you can go to be okay. And that's inside yourself. And everything is okay. If no matter what happens, everything will be okay. And that was the most beautiful, beautiful, resonant feeling. And that, I think, is the mantra for me. No matter what, everything's going to be okay. And you don't feel it at the time because everything feels like it might be falling apart. But everything will be okay.
Yeah, so good. Well, let's now move to the Win the Day rocket round. 10 questions with some quick answers. You up for this one, Keith?
Quick is tough for me, but I'm my best.
You can take as long as you want. Number 1, what quote inspires you the most?
I love ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. I love just the principle of just always asking yourself, what can I do for it? And let's just stick with it, with this great land. I still believe no matter what challenges America may be having today, it's one of the most amazing places to have the honor of being born on this soil. What can you do to make it better?
So good. Number 2, morning coffee or evening wine?
Yes.
Number 3, what's one bit of advice you would give your 18-year-old self?
Oh gosh, I wish I'd, I don't know that I would have tried to encourage my 18-year-old self to stay in politics, because I'm not sure what kind of success he would have had by trying to be authentic and actually be successful at the time. But what I can say is I've had to do a lot of unbundling since my 18-year-old self of shame and fear, just that, you really are special, and just keep going out and crushing it and stop trying to prove it to people.
Number 4, what book do you gift the most or that contributed most to the mindset you have today?
I mean, I have to admit, I still give out all the time, Never Eat Alone. But if I were to back up from that, I love Peter Diamandis' book, Abundance. Mm-hmm. I think it just, for where we are in this world today and everybody feeling so under siege, and to realize that the world is abundant and it's getting better is a powerful lesson.
So good. Number 5, was there a vulnerability you once hid within that became your superpower?
It is the act of vulnerability. Sharing where you're struggling with people is a powerful thing. I'll give you a little tutorial. I was in India recently, and there was this young woman that was interviewing me in a podcast. And she'd gone to Stanford. And when she introduced herself to me, I didn't have much resonance with her emotionally. It felt like she had a chip on her shoulder. It felt off-putting. And yet I could only imagine how difficult it was to be her, right? A female businesswoman in India, going to Stanford, trying to figure out where her way was between the two countries, et cetera. And so I grew empathetic because the story I told myself of what she had gone through, but not for her personally. And I said, let's do this over again. She was like, what? I was like, I want to do over again your introduction of yourself to me, because honestly, I didn't feel drawn to it. I said, I want you to do 3 things. Feel free to tell me what you've achieved. Fine. But you only are going to have a third of the time that it took originally to do it. Second thing, I want you to share something authentically that to get where you were, you really had to struggle with to get here. And the third thing I want you to do is I want you to tell me what difference you want to make in the world. So redo your intro with those 3 things. And she did. And she paused, of course, at the beginning. She was like, just, you could tell. And then she really got a little bit emotional. And she said, thank you. Let me do that again. And she did. And it was really beautiful.
Totally different person.
So the use of vulnerability is probably what I wouldn't hide.
That's so good. Number 6, what's one thing you've learned about failure?
It's abundant. And that it's resilient. And that it's short-lived.
Number 7.
3 things, sorry.
All good. Number 7, if you could sit on a park bench and have a conversation with someone alive or dead, who would it be?
Jesus. But I'd also love to have his brother with me, Buddha and Muhammad. And, I once, I had a dream one time where I was dancing and I looked over and Jesus was dancing. And I was like, oh shit, that's Jesus. And I like moving over, dancing a little closer to Jesus. And I, and then just talking to him a little bit. And I said, hey, one thing I don't understand is like, you've got you got Muhammad, you got Buddha, you've got all these folks. What do I do about all that? And he's like, it's easy. We're all brothers. We have the same father. And I thought that was beautiful.
That's really good. Number 8, what tool or resource best helps you run your life or your business?
Administrative assistance. My team, I don't know what I would do without them.
Helps you get it done. Number 9, share one thing on your bucket list.
The Northern Lights. believe it or not. Yeah, I've not done it. I just need to find the time and make it happen.
And last question, number 10, what's one thing you do to win the day?
Every single day, and I'm on my way to do it, is a great workout. I'm going to go to Barry's boot camp as I always do on my way home today. So Thank you for asking.
I love it. Well, there are a bunch of ways to connect with Keith, and we'll link to all of these in the show notes. You can follow him on Instagram at Keith Ferrazzi, visit his website, keithferrazzi.com, and grab a copy of his awesome new book, Never Lead Alone. Again, all that and more will be linked in the show notes. Keith, thanks so much. What a pleasure.
My pleasure, truly. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me on another episode of the Win the Day podcast. We want to hear your thoughts on what we covered today, so drop a comment on the YouTube version of this episode with your favorite takeaway, any questions you have, or what actions you'll be taking as a result of what was shared in this episode. And if you found value in the Win the Day podcast, leave a 5-star rating on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You'll find a link to both of those in the show notes. It'll only take you a few seconds, and more ratings really helps other people discover the show so they can get the mindset upgrade they need, and we can bring more winners into the Win the Day movement. That's all for this episode. Get out there and win the day. Until next time, onwards and upwards, always.